Are we ready to call to order? So, no worries. Ready? All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a call to order of the Finance Committee. The time is now, what is the time? 6:08 p.m. In attendance is Joseph Sokolovic, myself, committee chair, Ms. Bobby Brown, committee member, Superintendent Testani, Ms. Marlene Siegel, Ms. Nadira Clark, and Ms. Liz Maurer. And first item on the agenda is approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve? I can second that. All in favor? All right, motion carries. All right, next up on the agenda will be, I lost my agenda. ESSA funding balances update. Who's taking that away?
Marlene can.
Ms. Siegel, take us away, please.
Good evening to everyone. I just need a moment in order to bring a document on the screen.
Yeah, we got it. Thank you, Ms. Brown. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Siegel.
Thank you. I'm going to put my notes on the screen in order to make it easier for everyone to follow. Okay. In terms of the ESSA grant update, I'd like to remind everyone that there are 3 ESSA grants, ESSA 1, ESSA 2, and ESSA 3. ESSA 1 is the CARES Act grant, which started in March of 2020 and will expire on September 30th of 2022. Our appropriation was approximately $8.7 million. We carried forward into the current fiscal year approximately $1.4 million, and our current balance now is approximately $153,000, which is encumbered for the Teacher's Choice E-Card program, the excess cost of that program due to the increased appropriation. So we are on track to close this budget hopefully by June, but certainly no later than September 30th of 2022. The ESSA 2 grant began on July 1st of 2021. It will expire on September 30th of 2023. Our appropriation was approximately $44.6 million. The primary goal, of course, is educational recovery and learning acceleration for every student. And we are projecting that by the end of this year, we will expend in the range of 20 to 23 million. I want to emphasize, as I always do, that when I specify a range, the actual amount could be lower or higher. So our actual expenditures could very well be 24 million or 25 million. But at this point, based on the information we have in regard to the various expenditure categories, we're projecting a range of 20 to 23 million. And we are on track, as I explained at the last meeting, to expend all of our funds by the end of the grant period. We monitor all of our grants, including the ESSA grants, very carefully on a continual basis. Now, the third grant, ESSA 3, is known as ARP ESSA, and that grant will expire on September 30th of 2024. The appropriation was approximately $100 million. The goals remain education recovery or renewal, learning acceleration, and enrichment for every student. We've complied with the guidelines that require at least 20% for learning recovery. And in the current year, the first year of the grant, 21-22, we are projecting expenditures of approximately 28 million. Once again, this is a projection. It could be 26 million in this year, or it could be 29 million. It depends on the needs that exist in the current year compared to what will exist in the second year and the third year. And then in the second year, we would project approximately 31 million, and in the final year, approximately $31 million. And once again, we're on track to expend the funds by the end of the grant period in accordance with our budget plan. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Yes, I got, I'm glad that there's going to be no money left on the table. We should never leave money on the table, and I'm sure you're going to precisely spend that money. I've got a curiosity question about the ESSA 3 and 20% requirement. I'm sure we're over it, right?
Yes.
Do you have an idea of what the percentage is?
Yes, I can. I just have to refresh my memory in one moment, please.
No worries.
Because I want to give you an exact number. So it'll just take me a minute. I do have that percentage. So priority 1 in the ESSA guidelines is learning acceleration, academic renewal, and student enrichment. And that is 48.75%.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah. I think it'd be good for us to get the percentage of all the categories we're spending on in the future for the next meeting.
Yeah, I can show you that now if you wish.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
Okay, one moment. I have to take this document down. So.
She just guessed I was asking. Prepared. Always.
Oops.
I didn't know I was asking that question until a minute ago.
So this is obviously a PowerPoint slide which shows the 5 main categories. We do have a 6th category which the state added. It's simply an other category that pertains to other categories necessary to maintain the operation of and continuity of services. And that final category is 1.05%. But you can see in category 1, 48.75, family and community connections, 4.18, social, emotional, and mental health of the students and staff, 10.3, strategic use of technology, staff development, and the digital divide, 9.6, building safe and healthy schools, 26.12%, for a grand total of 100%.
Now, I know it's a small percentage amount. Is the $2.4 million included in the, I'm talking the Hero Fund? That would be in the, is that included in the other category or in
I'm
school
sorry,
staff?
Mr. Croft, I didn't hear the beginning of the question.
The heroes pay, is that included in number 3 or number 6?
The heroes pay or premium pay. We are funding in the ESSA 2 grant, and that would fall in category 1 because it would be part of the academic initiative in that it's being utilized as a retention incentive to retain qualified teachers for instruction and the provision of the best possible educational program for the students.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Brown, any questions? Mr. Benahan, any questions? Okay, hearing no questions, I guess we can move on to the next area of the agenda, which is...
Okay.
21-22 financial status.
Right, I just need a moment to bring up the document again.
Yes, ma'am, take your time.
All right, so once again, I have put my notes on the screen to make it easier for everyone to follow the brief presentation on 21-22. The financial condition report as of February 28th, which is Monday, is in development. We're in the process of finalizing that report this week, and it will be most likely posted next week in the early days of March. Now, I want to once again remind everyone that in order to balance the operating budget in 21-22, we are projecting that a withdrawal of $5 to $6 million from prior year savings on deposit in the Internal Service Fund will be required. Once again, I emphasize that when I refer to a range of $5 to $6 million, when we close the budget in August, the final amount could be $5 million, it could be $6.5 million. There are many variables that impact the final budget condition. But at this time, we're maintaining a range of about $5 to $6 million. I would also add that at this point in time, based on the data that we're reviewing for the February 28th report, it is more likely to be in the higher range, meaning closer to $6 million. Now, the Internal Service Fund, as I mentioned at the last meeting, currently has on deposit savings of approximately $20 million. Now, that $20 million includes, as a reminder, and I'm not presenting anything new. This is information that I've shared in the past several times. So the components of the $20 million are $2 million, which is the pre-1819 or pre-Connecticut Partnership component. That was a $2 million surplus that existed that we carry forward. $6.5 million that was added at the end of the 1920 fiscal year at the close, $10.8 million added at the end of 2021, and also at the end of 2021, $875,812 added from the food and nutrition budget. And we add funds from the food and nutrition budget in order to cover the health insurance expenses and workers' comp expenses for food and nutrition retirees. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. We're covering the health insurance costs of the retirees and workers' comp coverage for the active employees, to be exact. Okay, so the reason we're adding the money at the end is to cover those expenses for the food and nutrition employees. Prior to that time, we're covering it with our funds, so we're just compensating our account. So the grand total is $20 million. Now, I also mentioned at the last meeting that when we speak about the Internal Service Fund, let's remember the purpose of the fund. The fund exists to establish a conduit or a mechanism for the payment of the health insurance costs and workers' compensation expenses. So it's a separate account that's established for the payment of those expenses. Now, in order to pay those expenses, it has to receive the revenue for those expenses. And so we always want to make certain that we have a surplus in the account. The goal is always to have a positive balance, because while the Connecticut Partnership Plan is an insured program, I explained last time that we're no longer self-insured, we are still responsible for workers' comp expenses. And the funds that we add to the account may or may not be sufficient to cover the expenses. Usually they are. We're very efficient in monitoring the account and ensuring that adequate funds are available. But the critical point is we have to continually monitor to make certain that the revenue exceeds the expenses. So the point is we never want to go to zero. We always want to have a surplus simply to cover the costs of the services for which the internal service fund exists. But right now the surplus is about 20 million. We expect to withdraw approximately 6 million to close the 21-22 budget gap. And that would leave a balance of 14 million for use in 22-23. And as I explained when we presented the budget request, if we need to close a gap of 6 million in the current year, in the subsequent year, if we don't receive 6 million in revenue, we need another 6 million to close that gap again, and we need funding to cover our escalated costs for collective bargaining, for health insurance, for transportation, for special education, and all of the other variables. All right, moving on. I want to just reiterate a few significant fiscal factors and implications. I want to again remind the board that the district has experienced and continues to experience significant growth in special education services, as well as an expansion of English language learner services for our rising number of English language learners. And when we speak about special ed services, that not only encompasses the opening of new special education self-contained classes, but also additional related services such as resource, speech, and occupational therapy. Now, we are utilizing our grant funds, including the ESSA grants, to the optimal extent practical, wherever appropriate and permissible to do so in accordance with the guidelines, to conserve our limited operating funds and increase our rollover capacity. Nevertheless, even with taking these actions within the guidelines, we are projecting that in order to close the operating budget, we will have to withdraw from the savings on deposit. Now, what are some examples of the actions that we are taking using the ESSA grants? So there are 8 additional SPED resource teacher positions funded in the grants because the needs arose due to the pandemic. There are 4 new kindergarten autism classes, ASD classes, funded in the 2-year ARP ESSA IDEA grant. That's a separate grant allocated solely for special education under ARP ESSA. And those needs as well arose due to the pandemic. There are 5 new English language learner positions, ESL positions, funded in the ARP ESSA grant. And let's remember that at the expiration of these grants, if the level of need for special education and L services has not declined, the district will have to continue those services through other resources at an annual cost of approximately $3.5 million. Right. Now, in conclusion, I always close with another reminder that we always operate in deficit prevention mode. And what that means is that we continue to implement our standard operating practices for stringent cost control and management. We practice stringent internal control, and we capture our accrued funds in all areas and build reserves to support a balanced budget. We leverage our funds across all sources in order to achieve optimal utilization to meet our needs, and we want to maximize our rollover capacity so that we can help close a budget gap in the new fiscal year. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Yes, ma'am. I think we should stop calling it deficit prevention mode and start calling it survival mode, because that's basically where we're at right now. But my question got to do with the survival. I mean, but for the allowable withdrawals from ESSA to cover some funds, but for the internal service fund.
I think it may be time to change it, but I would recommend budget balance mode.
Okay. Yeah, what would our deficit be, but for all the measures you were able to take through the ESSA funds, the allowable measures through ESSA funds and the withdrawal of the ISF? Because I'm looking to get a number for us, basically a structural deficit, but because if we didn't have that money, we'd be that much short and have to take other actions.
Well, in the current year, 21-22, in order to close the operating budget, we're projecting that we'll have to withdraw approximately $6 million
From the ISF. And,
from the ISF.
right, and what about the...
So our structural shortfall in 21-22 is projected at approximately 6 million. Now it may end at 6.5, it may end at 5.5, or a number in that range.
Okay, so we say there's some allowable expenses from the ESSA funds that are being covered, and those positions are still going to be around in 2024, assuming. And what's the cost of those positions that's being covered through ESSA that we're going to have to cover through our budget coming in 2024 when funding runs out? Well,
for the positions I mentioned, including the paraprofessionals in the self-contained special education classes, approximately $3.5 million.
So added both together is approximately $9.5 to $10 million, which will probably only compound again next year if we're in the same exact situation.
And it's going to continue to compound. It basically is going to double.
All right, so 9, 18, 27. So fiscal year 2025, we'll probably have a
it's
$27 million hole.
I'm sorry.
It could be.
If things continue as is, we're looking at like maybe a $27 million hole come fiscal year 2025, if I got that right.
Yeah,
It could be more based on collective bargaining.
Yeah, it's going to compound because again, we have a $6 million gap this year, right? So technically, we have a deficit, we have a shortfall, we have a gap. It's $6 million. Fortunately, we have $6 million in savings from prior years. So we're going to close that gap and we're going to end balanced. Now, when we go into the next year, if nothing else changes, meaning we're not eliminating programs, we're not eliminating services, so assuming we want to maintain, which we do, the same level of services, we now have that same $6 million gap that we have to cover, and we have all of the other additional cost factors that I showed you as part of the 22-23 budget request, which at the time of the request was projected in totality at 18 million. That 18 million included the 6 million.
Wow. Okay, thank you. Ms. Baptiste Perez.
Yeah, so I apologize for joining the meeting late. But from the funds that we have in the savings for the operational budget, if for that 6 million, if we use it up, I guess where are we going to keep getting the money? Where is it compounding from?
Yep.
Okay, we're short.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't get the money we need, if we were to stay in the typical status quo of 2 million from the city and right now nothing from the state side, where is this money coming from?
Right. Well, first of all, for next year, let's assume that we withdraw 6 million in order to balance this year. We would have a balance of 14 million in the internal service fund. So we would have up to 14 million available in 22-23 to help close the gap.
We would have how much available? Sorry, I missed that.
Well, we have 20 million on deposit. If we withdraw 6, we would have a balance of 14 million. Okay.
Okay.
Now, as I, without getting too technical, as I presented in the budget request PowerPoint, there are other measures that we use in order to help close a gap, because when we write the initial request, we assume that every position is going to be filled. and filled from the start of the school year. And the reality is that every position will not be filled. Our goal is to strive to fill the highest percentage possible of positions with certified staff, and in the case of paraprofessionals with qualified staff. But the reality is there will be some vacancies that occur. Not every vacancy is filled immediately. So there are savings that result. So those savings then help to close a budget gap. So 23, we're in 21, 22, 22, 23 may be a survival year, meaning that we would be able to close a gap with the assistance of the funds available in the Internal Service Fund. 23, 24 may be the year of the fiscal cliff. So the fiscal cliff could come sooner than expected. We were hoping it wouldn't arrive until after the expiration of the ESSA grants, but it could potentially come sooner. Let's remember that Bridgeport has historically been underfunded. Our NCEP is far lower than Hartford and New Haven as examples. So historically, we strive every year to secure additional funds from the city. We believe the city should be adding funds to our operating budget every year in order to help mitigate the effects of the fiscal cliff and provide, of course, adequate resources. Now, at the state level, which we'll discuss in the next topic, we were anticipating an annual increase in the Alliance ECS grant. And unfortunately, the governor is recommending adjustments to the biennial budget that was passed by the state. And if the governor's adjustments were to be approved, the Alliance addition for 22-23 would be $11,879, not $1.5 million, as expected. Now, in general, when a district has an operating need and doesn't have sufficient revenue to meet that need, a district has to take actions to reduce costs. But we have severe needs and extensive needs based on our enrollment, and we are striving to secure from the state and the city the maximum allocations that are possible in view of the underfunded status of Bridgeport. Bridgeport has been historically underfunded and continues to be underfunded. Let's remember that the ESSA grants represent a one-time infusion of funds. Fortunately, they're extending over a multi-year period, but that multi-year period will expire.
Any other questions, Ms. Baptiste Perez?
Yeah, just so it's clear for the record, who has historically underfunded the Bridgeport public schools? Is it the city of Bridgeport?
Both the state and the city.
So both the state and the city. And how much historically would you say within the last 3 years has the city contributed to the operating costs? Do you know that?
The city contributes, I believe it's about 27%.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's covered in the slides in the budget request PowerPoint,
Yes.
which I can bring up if you'd like to see it.
I think it'll be helpful because, Ms. Siegel, I think one of the things is if we don't reach our operation costs, most people don't understand the actions that we have to do to reduce the cost and the scope of it. a lot of it is a so then what happens factor. Like, I guess people want to know doomsday in advance. And being able to explain that, how would that actually look is, or maybe hypothetical examples of what it would mean if we didn't have the operation costs and an adequate contribution from the city may be helpful with advocacy, as well as with the state as well.
And we've had to do that in the past, and in the past 10 years, there were several years in which we had to make major reductions in programs and services in order to balance the budget. I'm just flowing through the PowerPoint. This is the slide on the NCEP, net current expenditures per pupil, which shows that of 166 Connecticut school districts, ranked from highest to lowest, Bridgeport fortunately is not the lowest, but we are 144. Our NCEP at the last calculation in October of 21 was 16,982. You can see that Hartford is 21,833. Now, I do want to emphasize that with NCEP, that calculation includes all funding in the district, including grants. So for every city, whether it's Bridgeport or Hartford or New Haven or any other, if there's a grant that is designated for a particular school, which means its focus is restricted, that grant is going to be included as well. We also know that Hartford and New Haven have more magnet schools, so they have additional funding for interdistrict magnet schools. Excuse me 1 second, I'm getting a spam call, so I just want to turn off that phone. Okay. So this slide is indicating that Bridgeport is underfunded by $19 million for every $1,000 in NCEP we don't receive. So if we were equitably funded with Hartford, our budget would rise by $95 million. Okay. Now I'm just going to scroll through to find the other slides that pertain to the questions you asked. So here in the pie chart, you can see the city share is 27.3 and the state is funding 72.7. Keep in mind as well that with an operating budget of approximately $260,000 that encompasses the city share and the state share, we also supplement that with major federal and state grants. And the Title I grant, for example, is about 14 million. Of course, that includes the amount that comes off for non-public schools. But if you look at these numbers for these major grants that are part of our overall strategic plan, it's $33.4 million. Meaning, without these grants, we would be seriously impacted in a negative way. All right. So here again, the city is 27.3, state is 72.7. You can see the grand total numbers here. The city contributed 71 million and ECS, including the Alliance grant, almost 189 million. Now, this chart shows the growth annually based on the grand total operating budget, and we have average revenue growth per year of 1.17%. There are very few districts that can survive on 1.17%. I think most districts are seeking at least 3 to 4% per year. And you can see that the city percentage, meaning the percentage of the additional amount to the grand total, average per year, 0.59. right? So the average per year, 1.17, and that's roughly even between the city and the state. And you can see here back in 1920, the city contributed 0.5%, and the state was 1.06. Okay. And this slide illustrates all of the, not all, but most of the services, examples of the services funded through the ESSA grants. When the grants expire, these services will no longer be funded. Now, in the budget request, we have a projected need of 18 million. And that 18 million is broken out among various categories on this screen. And you can see that collective bargaining and health insurance alone are close to, you know, 8.5 million. So let's say close to 9 million. With MRF, which is the retirement fund for the non-certified staff, where we're going to have to contribute 20.20% next year. That requires approximately another $1 million. So the top three items alone are about 9.5 million. And then we always have a factor for special ed. We have to have a factor for transportation because it's contractual and the rates do increase. We will have a new contract starting July 1st. We're about to go out for RFP after the board approves the RFP on Monday. Approval is expected. So we don't know what the percentage will be in the first year, but I had to project a percentage for budgeting purposes. And then here's the 6 million from the ISF on two lines, 2 million plus 4 million that I mentioned earlier that we have to close again as part of the gap. And then there's the vacancy fill factor, meaning that even with the gap of 6 million this year, if all of our positions had been filled, our gap would have been higher. But because we have a number of teacher positions that are filled by subs due to the lack of qualified certified staff, and we have paraprofessional positions that we haven't been able to fill due to the staffing challenges that have emerged as a result of the pandemic, we have savings. So, but when we build the new budget, we assume at the start that all positions are going to be filled. So now we need funding in order to fund these full positions. As I mentioned, it's most likely that there will be some vacancies. Vacancies will materialize. So there will be savings, and when we develop our gap plan, we build in a projection of the savings from the vacancies being covered by absences. Now we're hopeful that next year we will have a lower number of vacancies across all personnel categories as the pandemic subsides.
Thank you.
And that we have a small reserve, and we always build in turnover savings. And that's how we reach 18 million as an initial projected monetary need.
Thank you.
All right. And this slide showed the breakdown on the collective bargaining increase. And then we were asking the city to contribute 8.5 million, which was intended to cover the collective bargaining cost and the health insurance.
Okay, Ms. Siegel, can we pause right there? I need to check to see if any other board members have questions. Ms. Brown? Mr. Benahan?
Sorry, I didn't hear you, Mr. Chair. Say that again, please.
You have any questions?
No, no question now, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Okay, do you have any more questions on this subject area, Ms. Perez, Ms. Baptiste Perez?
I understand the numbers and what we're asking for. I guess I was just looking for a more concrete example, is for like, if we don't get that fund, then what is the scenario? Will we have to close a school? Will we have to fire teachers? I think part of that was answered in the slides.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I want to be able to
Well,
emphasize that when advocating for the funds and
right.
informing different groups that what are the consequences if we don't get proper funding from the city and the state. And I think sometimes when I mention historically, people always want to know, the basics: who, what, when, where, and why. And I want to be able to clearly emphasize that, as well as give examples to how it will, I guess, personally impact the community at large. So
Yes,
Yeah, I can answer that. Right now, there's no way of being able to concretely give specifically what the impact could be, because I haven't been able to sit down and have an understanding of the reality of the situation at the moment. So right now we're talking hypotheticals. I think it's unfair for people to be faced with hypotheticals. It doesn't do the district any good in terms of stability of staff if there's a belief that they could lose their job or the possibility of job loss. That just makes recruitment and retention much more difficult. But I will say very clearly that nothing is off the table when it comes to the fact that when we have to make difficult decisions when the time comes, because it's not about if, it's when. Nothing is off the table. But one thing that will not be on the table is anything that will impact classroom instruction of high quality for students. So there could be things that historically have not been discussed for whatever reason, but if they do not impact the instruction of students and the social emotional well-being of students, it would be on the table.
yeah, I understand where you're coming from, Ms. Baptiste Perez, and I've got an idea of what you're looking for, and I think sorry to say, but people might have to get scared because that might be the reality they face. I don't want them to wake up one day as a city and not be prepared. We do have instances where we've had X million dollars of budget cuts, which we could present next to it. This is what it looks like when we had to cut $12 million from the budget because we did not receive enough funding. We lost this many positions. Because we're talking potential of $24-25 million, which we haven't faced in total cuts in maybe multiple years. And those positions we cut before are gone. We can't cut them again to make that savings. So we got to go somewhere else. To say we're going to make cuts that don't affect the classroom, I think is kind of disingenuous, because any cuts at this point is going to affect the kids because we're to the bone now. So we can't paint a false reality that everything's going to be hunky-dory when it's not. Because then they're going to turn around and say, we never told them. And we're going to lose the advocacy, the emergency of the advocacy that needs to be done now to prevent these things from happening later. I mean, I know it's making a lot of politicians uncomfortable having these conversations early, especially with elections coming up, but we're not here to appease the politicians. We're here to get this budget balanced. I mean, Ms. Siegel's performing miracles with this budget, and I gotta give kudos, but the urgency's been there. Ms. Siegel, ever since I started paying attention to the board, Ms. Siegel's been talking about we need a revenue stream. Every superintendent I've watched has talked about the impact of budget cuts and not having a viable school system if we continue this over and over again. So I'll state it emphatically, if the mayor, the city council, the governor, or the federal, in some combination, way, shape, or form, do not adequately fund this school system, it's not going to look like it does today. It's going to look much worse.
The reality is that successive years of insufficient operating appropriations will cause formation of a fiscal cliff, and not just a cliff, a steep fiscal cliff, when the supplemental resources through ESSA and other grants are no longer available. So I believe at this point, based on current information, that we will be able to survive into 22-23. But that is with the expectation of receiving a reasonable addition to the budget from the city, and hopefully the state budget being restored to the original biennial budget that was approved. But I have been very concerned, and the superintendent and I have had conversations about the fiscal cliff arriving sooner than previously expected, meaning 23-24, not 24-25. And that is our concern, and we have to continue to emphasize that operating appropriations, meaning revenue from the state and the city, must be adequate in each successive year.
Thank you. Ms. Perez, were you finished? I kind of.
Oh, I was waiting to be acknowledged.
I'm sorry.
I understand, Superintendent Testani, the idea of not wanting to necessarily draw panic, especially amongst the staff, but I want to fully inform whether it's a parent, another elected official, other members of the board who aren't on this meeting, what our options are. And it's just in my training as an attorney, you have option A, B, C, and these are all your different variables that can impact it. I think the urgency is there as we've passed the potential for heroes pay, but as it was phrased in our last general meeting, it's retention pay for teachers, and that comes from our operational costs. And so I want to see our schools succeed. I want to see our teachers paid, but I also want to see what's the reality and what's the steps to kind of get it there and be able to present those options to the city at large. And so I think just hearing successive years of insufficient operation costs, that's terrible. That's just absolutely terrible. Especially the fact that it can happen within a lot sooner than later. We need to hold public officials accountable and present those pictures and have it for the record, because I will at least say I've done all that I could on the board and on the finance committee to advocate for these funds. And in the particular position the city is in right now, and just speaking to the city of Bridgeport, with, I believe there's a surplus of funds. I don't see why the schools who desperately need it at this time, especially since the state's taken away some funds, wouldn't get its fair share.
Well, I mean, we don't know for sure. I mean, the governor's proposed budget is what it is. It's not necessarily going to pass as is. There are conversations that are occurring with lawmakers, and that will be ongoing. And hopefully, I think we're making some headway. I feel confident that the loss of funds from the state is not going to be reality. And I do think that we will continue to see growth on the city side to the extent of $8.5 million. No, I don't think that's a reality. So that is something that if we're going to advocate, we're going to need to advocate for the full amount. But to say what the options are now, I don't think we're in a position to do that, because they could change between now and the time that we need to, make those decisions. It's I do think in general there are operational things that are that we continue to do in public education that may no longer be feasible in the manner that we provide the service. That I will say. There are things that we provide that maybe will be better served using other providers. But there are a lot of other factors that go into those decisions that need to be considered. But like I said, there will be tough decisions if and when the time comes, and they may not be very popular. But the warning has been, needs to be, the alarm needs to be sounded to these folks. I like the word hold them accountable. The only problem is if you've been in the district as long as I have, the term hold our lawmakers accountable, our city council accountable has been used for decades. It hasn't held anybody accountable, unfortunately. I'd like to really see what holding them accountable means. Because that's an interesting term. It just doesn't really resonate much historically. So I'd like to really see what that looks like.
Let's go. We'll go through the communities and give these presentations community by community. Let them all hear the facts and knowledge. Last time it was tried, it was shut down because people's feelings were getting hurt from real hard talk. And the reason it was shut down is because they were afraid to be held accountable. But I don't think we should stop. I think we should go through all the districts again, present the facts clear as day, who's responsible for what funding, and let the constituents know, tell their city councilors ahead of time where their priorities lie, and let them put the emphasis on education and let them know. A Republican may never win, but Democrats have primaries. I'm sorry, I suppose I did it again.
I was just waiting to be acknowledged. I guess my question is, where is this source of pessimism within the city, especially from the city side? There appears to be funds available for the school. So asking for 8.5 isn't a reality. I'm failing to see why is that not a reality, and advocating for that is not a reality, especially since that is what the need is. Wouldn't the city need a reality check as to what the schools adequately need before we jump into maybe some items are outdated? We actually get what we need and still make those kind of determinations later. I just had a comment.
I don't disagree with the advocacy for the full $8.5 million. The pessimism comes from 10 years of what was on the slide to say that all of a sudden the epiphany has been realized and we're going to go from, zeros to twos to 8.5 in 1 year. That's where the pessimism comes, but the advocacy shouldn't change. I wouldn't be having meetings with state lawmakers. I wouldn't be, writing letters to folks. I wouldn't be doing all this if it wasn't what I thought could have an impact. I do think we are getting some traction at the state level. But, I'd like to see more traction from the city folks. But I think there's still, and there are some conversations that are going to be had on that end in the coming weeks. So I'm optimistic, but am I holding my breath at $8.5 million from the city? If I was, I would be naive to say that, that I would. I mean, just based on history.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the historical trends, but for COVID, I think the city now has the money.
Well, they have $9 million. If they gave us 8.5 this year, they're locked into that 8.5 again next year, and the 8.5 the following year, and the 8.5. So once they give it to us, it is required for them to continue to give it to us. If it was, hey, we'll give you 8.5 this year, and then next year we'll reduce you, that would be something could be negotiated, but there's no negotiation. Once they give it to you, it is there forever. So that's where the pessimism comes, because they have a one-time surplus. And that's why I say it's going to be a difficult grind, because, you know, if they want to utilize the entire 9 million for education, then at least for maybe, you know, we'll give you 3 this year, which means then we can give you 3 for the next 2 years. And that buys us some time to see where things go. But to say we're going to give you 8.5 now, knowing we may not have the 8.5 next year, they're never going to commit to that unless they have, as we've discussed and Marlene has reiterated, they've established a funding source that will be able to maintain that level of funding for the future. Now, who knows? Maybe that's in the works with new projects in the city that are being constructed, but I don't see that happening where there's $8.5 million in new tax revenue coming in that they're going to set aside for education.
Yeah, I find
yeah.
that.
I didn't raise my hand this time.
No, sorry. Yeah, I'll just be real quick. I find it hard to believe that they can't get $8.5 million. I mean, Joe Ganim and the city council, they're going around touting all these new projects and all this new movement. I mean, if the city's doing so well, shouldn't the tax revenue be jumping along with the great state of our city?
Well, according to the state, we have the largest number of properties that are untaxable. So churches and those kind of, we have the largest number of non-paying tax properties in the state.
Okay.
That is problematic.
Yeah, I got to pull up a comparison, but from my recollection, New Haven and Waterbury exceed us in that area, and yet both contribute more to their thing. I'll send you the data later. I could pull it up as city data, but I think we're at worst third in that area when you do a comparison. Mr. Perez.
See, I had to raise my hand.
That's Baptiste Perez. I'm sorry.
Just a comment on that with the 8.5 million. I think that is exactly why advocacy needs to start early. Just to kind of piggyback on Mr. Sokolovic's comment, the city needs to do strategic planning and probably shouldn't be giving out tax breaks to businesses if those businesses are the type of businesses where we can generate, where the city can generate money for revenue for the schools. However, whether it's lack of information, lack of an understanding of the impact of tax breaks, especially being mindful not to pass the burden of taxes to homeowners, development projects for business generating revenue. I think that's for the city to really understand, especially when it's given tax breaks, abatements, how that impacts the long run for funding sources for the school. And so I'm glad that we're having this conversation now, because while it's touting surplus funds, what will next year look like, and really looking at future projections.
Yeah, I agree. I wish I had a say in how the city operates their system, but unfortunately, that's not in my purview. But I agree with you. There needs to be a plan in terms of long-term growth and development across the city, and what that means in revenue for the city, and how that revenue can be steered toward education. But that hasn't been the case for a long time, and I'm not sure what the position of the current administration is But we did see an investment from the city, that went into other projects that were private projects that were, that bypassed education in the last couple of years. And, Joe's well aware of that. Not to say those projects won't have some impact on the city's economic growth, but, I think private funders should fund their own projects when it comes to, businesses that are for profit.
No, I wholeheartedly agree, and my dog does too.
Okay, is that all, Ms. Perez? Ms. Baptiste Perez, I'm sorry, keep doing it.
Sorry, dog's still barking. That's it for now. Yes.
Ms. Brown? I don't see her there. Mr. Benahan? Okay, hearing nothing, I guess we can move on to the next agenda item, the 21-22 budget update. I don't think we need to go through the whole slideshow, just any changes that have happened, especially highlighting I'm sorry, 22-23, I misspoke.
I don't think there's been any
I believe
change.
you already covered it, Mr. Sokolovic. I mentioned the status of the governor's recommended adjustments. There isn't anything new beyond the discussion we've already had to report at this time.
All right, awesome. So I think, is that my last item?
No, one more.
Oh, yes, that would be the charter school expenditures. That was an item brought up by Mr. Benahan.
Yes. So we provided to the board the chart that I have on the screen. And this is actually a workbook with the data on expenses for charter schools starting in 2014-15. So we have a tab for each year. And the tab on the screen is 21-22. And we are expending approximately $3.5 million for transportation and special education services. The charter schools provide their own resource teacher services as well as paras when required as per IEPs. And they bill the district for those services. We do have guidelines for the cost factors. And then we provide, through our special ed department, social work, psychology, and speech services. So in this chart, what we have done in each year is to equate those supplemental services, social work, psychology, and speech, to a monetary value. And the grand total is approximately $3.5 million. If you go back to the prior year, 2021, it was also about $3.5 million. There is a difference in the number of days in the years. Last year, there were 177 school days. This year, there's 181. However, there was some reduction in special ed services at two of the charter schools. And I was informed by our transportation office that there was a decline in the number of bus passes required in the upper grades. So that would explain why, even with the increase in the days, the total is projected at approximately the same number, approximately $3.5 million. Now, we are required to provide these services in accordance with state law. Thank you. And are there any questions?
I'll let Mr. Benahan start off on this one since it's his item. Is he still with us?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, what you said? Sorry, I heard my name.
Yeah, we're on the charter schools. Did you have any questions you wanted to ask about this since it's your item?
Yes, I have a question, and I'm reading everything what Ms. Siegel said in it on the package. What this is a Bridgeport school provide all this money for charter school. And second question, what the charter school provide for them? They have their own budget, is all, or is only Bridgeport school give this budget to charter school?
We're required to provide the services in accordance with state education law to the charter schools. So we provide the services through our operating budget. Charter schools do receive funds from the state in order to operate, but state law states that the local district will provide the transportation in accordance with the transportation guidelines, and will also provide the special education services.
Mr. Chair, I have another question.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Siegel, when you said that charter school provide their own budget and everything, question for you is by the law we supposed to Bridgeport school have given all this budget to them when you just said they provide its own money?
The state law requires that the school district, the local school district, the local public school district, provide the transportation and the special education services to the charter school within the school district's budget. So the funds that are documented on the screen for transportation and special education are funds in the Bridgeport operating budget. The charter schools have their own funds or budgets that they utilize to operate their schools.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I have another question if you mind.
Yes, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Siegel, question for you because that's what I heard from another parent. That charter school, when they got this budget coming from Bridgeport school by their own budget from them, they are very covered for special need students. Just give a sample, just in case they have some, let's give an issue with the students and they cannot help the student with special need. They're supposed to keep trying to help them because they receive money from Bridgeport school, or they can transfer to regular school.
So, Mr. Bennett, I can answer that. They can't transfer them, but if the parent withdraws them and comes back to the district, then that happens all the time. They also can recommend an out-of-district placement that we would be responsible to cover as well. That's why we participate in the PPTs for the charter schools to make sure that we are well represented. The one thing that I have raised to the state is that they've issued 6 charters in Bridgeport, which is a lot. But out of the 6 charters, 2 of the charters have opened second buildings, which helps increase their enrollment and access 2 more schools. So that's been something that's been raised as well, to that the growth of the 6 charters basically has made it now 8 schools rather than 6. So that is something that's been placed on their radar as well.
Mr. Chair, I have another question for last one for Ms. Siegel, if I might.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Siegel, I have a question. What am I concerned in? I understand that the charter school have some budget and they receive some money for the special need kids. So they take on some IP students, and what I understand that after they receive the budget from the IP, regular student from Bridgeport, and then when they receive the budget, they transfer.
I see.
In other words, they take out the kids from the charter school because they cannot handle no more after they receive the budget.
I see what you're saying, Mr. Benahan. So yes, they receive.
Mr. Testani, I'm sorry to interrupt.
But this is not a Ms. Siegel question. This is not a Ms. Siegel question. I can help. This is a me question because the enrollment numbers and the funding they receive is based on October 1st. And we are working now with a new system so that there are no duplicates and that schools, once they receive their funds based on the October 1st enrollment, does not then send the kids back to us, where then they get to keep the money. I see what you're saying. There are instances, yes, where they keep kids on the rolls long enough to be counted for the receiving of funds, and then the kids are then sent back to the Bridgeport Public Schools. That has occurred, and we are working. We've had 2 meetings with all the charter school providers. I have had them in my office to discuss ways that we can streamline and be able to communicate so that the duplication of kids is not occurring. We seem to have we have a portal we're launching this year where kids will be placed in the portal by the charter school, and then once they're placed by one charter school, then they can't be duplicated by anyone else. And if they come to us, they'll be removed from the portal to try to defend against students being counted at a charter and then ending up with us.
Thank you, Mr. Destani. I was not finished my question with you when you interrupt me, but because I want to be clear, because I know they really accept some students from regular for the charter school, and then they receive the money, and after 6 months, 1 month, 1 year, they return it back. But I already clear what your answer, and but I'm not accept that because as a board members at Bridgeport School, we deal with all the special need kids, and we never give up, and we always trying to do the best we can. So it's not fair that charter school, after we see the budget, the money, we're not talking about $100 or $1,000. We're talking about millions. They don't, deal with the students. So you really clear me my question, Mr. Chair. No more question. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
And Ms. Baptiste Perez.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the content in the presentation. I wanted to know why side-by-side charter school in Norwalk and Stanford Academy is included. That's the first part of the question. The second part is why is no data pertaining to Stanford Academy included, because that charter school is still open. So I just wanted to know why they're included in our Bridgeport data, and it seems at least is not accurately recorded.
Well, the goal is to include all the charter schools. I just want to go back and look at last year. They were included last year as well with 0 and some speech language service that side by side. There may not be any students attending. I don't know. I'm just speculating. This is prepared for me by one of my staff members, so I'm trying to give you the best answer that I can at the moment. But side by side does have some speech service that is provided.
Well, I asked this because in preparing for the meeting, I called. Stanford Academy exists. They have students enrolled. They have a day. They were willing to explain to me over the phone part of their budget and how it works. And so it leads me to inquire the integrity of the information provided, at least for those 2 schools.
I'm not clear on what you said. You said that Stanford Academy has Bridgeport students?
No, Stanford Academy is open. So why there's no data for it, at least for a comparable?
Where is this?
But they don't have any Bridgeport kids that we contribute to.
So that's why it's at 0.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, I'd have to verify with the staff member who prepared this, but I'm going back in time to our other charts, and I see Stanford Academy listed 2 years ago with some services for special ed that were billed.
There was some students that were our nexus.
Transportation. The children attending the academy may be walking to school. Maybe Stanford's providing its own transportation and not asking us to provide it. There could be any number of explanations, but I can assure you that we provide accurate data.
Okay. No, I was just wondering. I was like, why is it not there? And so
Yeah, well,
That
again, we list all of the charter schools. I am assuming since, I mean, it says 0 students, so that would mean we don't have any children attending, and therefore we don't need to provide transportation or services. For side by side, it's indicating 236 students, but apparently transportation's not required. But we are providing speech service.
got you. So it's 200. I'm sorry, I'm reading it from the team screen, but just say 200 students that reside in Bridgeport are traveling to Norwalk for charter school.
No, that's
Is
incorrect.
that the way to read it? That's what I'm trying to understand, how to read this chart.
Well, again, this was prepared for me by a staff member, and that staff member entered 236 students. Let's go back and look. Last year it was 236, the year before 235, the year before 0. So I would have to inquire tomorrow.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to understand, is when it says number of students, whose students? Is it a number of Bridgeport students? Because then that's the way I'm reading Stanford Academy.
It would be the number of students in the school who are, I mean, it should be the number of students attending from Bridgeport. Right, but again, all of those students may not need transportation. Maybe they're walking to
The side-by-side number's inaccurate.
and some of the students may not need special ed services. But we will review those 2 schools again
Yes.
tomorrow.
Ms. Baptiste Perez, you're absolutely right. The side-by-side numbers are inaccurate when it comes to Bridgeport students. That must be the total enrollment in the building, but does not reflect the accurate numbers. We did confirm with all the Bridgeport within the city boundaries enrollments earlier in the year, because we did have some questions when it came to busing and special ed services. So those numbers are accurate when it came to enrollment at the time. Those numbers may have changed since the fall, when we did confirm and have the meeting with the charter school representatives.
Yeah, because I just kind of, it just stood out to me. So that's why I followed up with like the first one is Stanford Academy with the big 0.
Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
And then it says it was updated as of 2/15/22. So I didn't question. I mean, that's when it should have been updated. So I'm assuming it's accurate to include that data. So that's why I brought it up. Thank you.
See another hand. Whose hands up? Is that Ms. Brown? Mr. Bennett, your hands back up?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I have another question, 2 questions and 1 comment. I don't know if Mr. Siegel can answer me or Mr. Testani, he'd like to answer my question. Question, why the summer charter school, like I can give you like a grade old staff and not be paying? Like are they working for free and they be look like they're certified to be, they be sure they're certified. That's my first question, and I don't know, I'm gonna give it the 3 so you can answer me in 1. And the old staff from charter school, they are certified to deal with regular student or special need. And also about the transportation that Ms. Christina said, what we can do to be sure if the student receive transportation, because I know, like Ms. Christina said, we got parents, and I know the parent, they've got school buses, they got the bus, talking, whatever, but the parents bring the student in the school that I know another student when you need that service.
Okay, Mr. Bennett, could you clarify your questions 1 by 1, please?
Of course, Mr. Chair.
The first one?
Is why some charter school, like grade old, staff are not being paid. That they are volunteer, so they can be certified later. That's the first question. My second question is...
could you pause there, Mr. Bennett, and let's address them one at a time, please?
So we don't have any control over the hiring of staff at the schools. They can, and they pay whatever they negotiate with the individual staff members at the school. So in terms of how if they're certified or not, they should be certified. They're supposed to be certified. But I know there's been instances in the past where some schools had employed uncertified teachers or a high concentration, but I'm not aware of their hiring practices. And if they're, following the certification guidelines as they're supposed to.
Your second question, Mr. Benet? Okay, you want to follow up on that?
Yes, please, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question, Mr. Testani. So we can verify who can get paid and who's not getting paid?
Well, I mean, if they're working for the school, I'm assuming they're getting paid. They wouldn't be a volunteer. Now, how they pay those folks if they're uncertified, I'm not sure if they can give them a contract if they so choose to, but that's the state's responsibility to follow up, not ours, in terms of their staffing. We don't have an idea. We don't get to see their staffing roster, nor do we have the ability to ask for certification on their staff.
And if I might interject for a minute, the reason the charter schools are separate from us is because we have no say over the day-to-day operations of the charter school, nor any oversight. So they're separate entities for us. So if they decide to not pay any of their employees, we can't even tell them you must pay their employees. That's something the state Board of Education would have to handle because they're a state charter. Like we are responsible for all the schools right here, and we vote on things that happen in those schools. None of our votes are effective for the charter schools because they got a whole separate body that governs them, which if one of those people had a problem with not getting paid, they would have to bring it to that body instead of us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your answer. And my second one was that all the staff working charter school, are they certified to be working with regular students, especially with the special needs students? Are they certified?
Well, if they're teachers, then they need to hold the same certifications as are required in a public school. So if you're teaching a student, a special education student, and you're a special education teacher, you need to hold a special education certification. Yes.
So you as a superintendent of the school and us as a board member, we cannot verify if they're certified or not. So it had to be state.
I mean, anybody can verify, anybody in the public. If you have the teacher's name, you can go on the State Department of Ed website and enter in the quick lookup, and it will show you the individual certifications if they have any, what's active, what's expired. That is all public information, but you have to know the individuals specifically that you're looking. We don't have a list of their staff members, but a parent can look up, just like anyone else, the certification of their child's teacher online at the State Department of Ed, Bureau of Certification, quick lookup.
Thank you. And my last question, Mr. Chair, how we can verify and to be sure the students exactly need the transportation, because I know, and I know a lot of parents, and I see it, that they have transportation, they have the bus, they have the talking, they have everything, but the parents bring the child in the school. So
we have the same issue. We have the same issue here. We base the transportation.
Let me finish, please. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I feel that that service another student needed so badly, and I know another student that need that service. So how exactly we can figure it out, verify address or something? It had to be something, because I feel they taking money. They're abusing the money when another student they can receive it. So I would like to, something.
Well, the address the school provides the address to us. Our transportation then based on the mileage from the distance from the parent's home to the school. If they're eligible for bus transportation or a bus pass, depending on the student's age, they're eligible. Now, whether they take advantage of the transportation, we have no way of knowing if they get on the bus once a week, 5 days a week, or not at all. But it's all based on the information that's provided to us. That's why we are creating the portal where this information needs to be entered into the portal. And it'll give us a little bit more oversight, but we're going to continue to work with the charter schools to see if we're hoping to take some baby steps to get into the same situation as they have in New Haven, where we control their lottery, the same way New Haven controls the lottery in New Haven. And then we'll be able to verify more of the information. But right now, we're dependent on the names and addresses that are submitted by the charter school to us.
Well, for the record, I want to be sure, Mr. Chair, that people understand that Bridgeport School, they're trying to help charter school and all the students, because we know we equal, because we want the best, education for our kids. But I don't like when people think that Bridgeport School is not helping charter school and people they're not abusing. So I want to be sure that for the record. And no more question, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for your time.
Ms. Baptiste Perez.
Yeah. So I have a question. Just like how we're supposed to know how many Bridgeport schools attend other charter schools and other districts, I was wondering if the chart can include, or do we know how many of our charter schools have students from other districts? And if so, are we covering the costs for transportation, or is that particular district covering the costs?
We're not aware, I mean, if they have students that live outside the city lines, then we are not obligated to do anything in terms of transportation.
What
I'm
about
not sure.
special ed services, since that's also on the chart as well?
The sending district would have to provide any services. I'm not aware if they do accept, they may accept students from other towns that I may not be aware of, but as far as I know, we only verify and provide transportation and special ed services for Bridgeport kids that attend charter schools in Bridgeport. Now, there are cases where, addresses could be falsified, but eventually that stuff catches up to people. We receive notifications all the time from different districts where they've found children living in Bridgeport that are attending schools, say in Stratford, and they're sent back.
Oh, thank you. No further questions.
Hey, Ms. Brown, is still on the line? Oh, she's having technical difficulties. All right, I got Ms. Siegel, one question. Of this $3.48 million number, the grand total, is this number embedded in per pupil expenditures in the presentations, or is it taken out and calculated?
I'm not sure I know what you mean. This is part of the operating budget.
Yes, the money comes from an operating budget, right? But one of the first numbers in our operating budget is Bridgeport's NCEP.
Oh,
Now, is this $3 million included, or is it extracted before the calculation is
it
made
would be
for?
included because we're using our operating funds to provide the services.
So if we were to take out this $3 million and then recalculate for students that are in non-charter schools, that number would be lower. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
That would be higher.
No, it would be low because you're taking out
We're taking out the kids.
taking $3 million along with the children.
And the children.
And then, because this is money concentrated
Right.
for children, so it would bring down our per pupil expenditure if it's outside the number.
So, Marlene, when we calculate the per pupil and we include the charter school 3.5 million, do we include?
I believe the state includes it in NCEP. We can check on that, but I believe it's included.
Right, but do they include the enrollment numbers of the charter schools as well added to our total?
I'm not aware that they would add the charter school students. No, the charter school students remain on the enrollment of the charter schools.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, can we find that out? Because it would be, I'm not sure, it would be a big inflation of the number, but it is a little, it would be slightly inflated.
There's nothing to find out. The dollars spent on the charter schools are part of our operating budget, so they're part of NCEP. And in NCEP, our students are counted. That's my understanding of the formula for NCEP, which the state applies.
Okay, so it wouldn't, right? It wouldn't change at all. Right. Okay.
All right, okay, thank you. Ms. Baptiste Perez.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood what just happened because I'm still learning all the acronyms when it's thrown out. For the charter schools operating, our operating budget, Bridgeport Public Schools, includes the $3.5 million for the special education costs and transportation costs. That's right? Simple. Yes. And for charter schools, they're approved by the city. The city of Bridgeport has to approve the charters.
No, the state approves the charter.
The state approves the charter. Does the city have any say into whether a charter is approved?
No.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. That's what I was trying to understand.
So for example, we got notification back in the fall that New Beginnings will stop operating 7th and 8th grade. And the state approved that. And they were just out of courtesy notifying me so that we would be prepared to, in case of students after 6th grade at New Beginnings returning back into our buildings as a courtesy. But whether I objected or not made no bearing because that was the decision and the approval of the State Board of Ed.
Is that all, Mr. Baptiste Perez?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got another question as far as the transportation. I know we've had issues in the past where the charter schools have changed their schedule and have caused problems with our transportation, and we had to go in pocket for a little more money. Has that situation been able to resolve itself?
No, so the pandemic did bring some challenges when we changed our schedule. It did impact charter, parochial, and Bullard Havens. Unfortunately, when we reverted back to our regular schedule, they asked, because they thought that they liked and they wanted to reduce their hours at the charter in particular, because their staff was not taking kindly to the extended day. That was the charter model. But we held a hard line that we were not going to accommodate their scheduling needs. They did appeal to the state. We had some conversations, and it didn't go in their favor.
Thank you. You mentioned parochial and private schools. Are we responsible for their transportation as well?
Yes.
And
Yes.
How much is expended on the parochial, and do we have those
Over
numbers?
$600,000.
And we're also responsible for their special ed and costs as
No.
well, or just transportation?
No.
Just the transportation.
Just the transportation
Okay, thank you.
and the transportation of Bullard Havens.
Oh, and the
But not their special ed cost.
Okay.
How much is transportation for Bullard Havens?
We actually had that in the PowerPoint. I just need a minute. Let's take a look. Transportation. Bullard Havens was $360,000 last year. And we would project for this year a similar amount.
And so for private schools and Bullard Haven, combined in total is approximately $1 million.
Yes, correct.
That's close to $5 million yanked from our operating budget before it even touches the traditional public school student.
Correct. Now, some people would bring the argument that well, you would have to educate these children anyway. However, for example, Bullard Havens, we would be able to absorb in our high schools, those students. There could be some cost to transportation, but it would be hard to say because they would attend their neighborhood school. And the same with the other charter schools. We would be able to absorb a lot of those kids without having to open up any other classrooms based on where they live. But those numbers are hard to say because we don't get all of their enrollment data, which mean all their demographics. But I mean, if we had all that information, which that now the portal will help us in determining what that impact could be. We may be able to, through data management, run some reports on how many of those kids would just be absorbed at no additional cost for next year.
Yeah, that's a big old conversation for Don.
It's a very complicated discussion because, there still would be some costs to those children coming back to us. The most difficult component to this is providing the special education services when we're already at a staffing shortage within the district. So it's become very challenging to meet the hours and the services to those students out of district with limited staff within the district. That's been the major challenge.
Ms. Baptiste Perez.
Oh, I had a point for clarification. I just probably misheard. It's the joys of being home. For the money from Bullard Haven, is that solely for transportation or transportation and special ed costs?
Just transportation
only.
Transportation only. That's it.
Is that all?
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I have no further questions. Does anybody else on lot, Mr. Danahan or Ms. Brown, have any questions?
No question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn at this point.
Motion to adjourn.
And I shall second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Have a great night, everybody. Great meeting, great questions.
Good night.
Have a good
Get
night,
all this
everyone.
money.
God bless you all.
Night.